If psychology and pop culture had a baby, they'd call it Shrink Tank.
There is a sort of pendulum that's swinging back and forth where we kind of go from one extreme.
And I think there's an element of truth to
because
this.
I have something interesting later in the show that will make you feel very weird.
From Nashville and Charlotte, this is the Shrink Tank Podcast. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. We have a fantastic show for you. Our trending topic today is the psychology of Keanu Reeves. But first, we're going to meet our Charlotte panel. Dr. Emma Kate Wright is here. Hello, Emma Kate.
Hi, Dave.
And Dr. Frank Gaskell's with us. Frank, how you doing?
Doing pretty good, Dave.
And Jonathan Hedderly is our certified Asian, who rounds out the panel. And each week, Jonathan trolls around the internet. He finds a great story of psychology in the news. It's our first segment that we call
Being Human.
New research charts the trajectory of optimism over the lifespan. So the question is, what age is our sense of optimism at its highest? Well, consistent with previous research, they found optimism to be the lowest in people's 20s, then rising steadily into people's 30s and 40s and peaking in the 50s. And then gradually declining after that. And specifically, it was at age 55 that people experienced the highest level of optimism. One other interesting piece of data is that people who had more negative life experiences were not any more or less optimistic than other people. So in other words, it appears that while positive life events can help elevate our sense of optimism, that's not the case with negative events detracting from it. So, Emma Kate, as our resident optimist person, what do you make of this research?
I could see it.
That's my optimist voice.
No, I could totally see this because we are struggling kind of in the 20s. I have finally escaped my 20s, and I can attest that it's hard, especially when you're trying to figure out what's your purpose. And then as you get more confident through work, through relationships, through connection in your communities, it starts to kind of build. Now, my one question about this research would be whether or not they have looked at optimism in comparison to life satisfaction, and then also in terms of religious and spiritual beliefs, because I feel like people as they age tend to approach life a little bit differently and gain spiritual perspective as they're nearing the end of their life. And I don't know if that construct of optimism necessarily makes sense, because it's hard to be optimistic when you're thinking about the end of your life, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that you're not satisfied with your life, if that makes sense.
Well, we should ask Dave. He's
Dave.
close to the end of his life. Like, how's your optimism, Dave?
I'm pretty optimistic that I am near the end of my life. Yes.
We are too.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to hold up very well.
I related to this in that I feel like I am more optimistic than I was when I was younger. I used to have a lot more negative, catastrophizing thoughts, and now that I'm 50 and I'm 5 years away from my big, most optimistic period of my life, I think I would line up with this article.
I'm going to pose a question that I don't know the answer to, but I was in an in-service, and one of our psychologists here in Nashville, a guy named Cameron Gordon, was doing an in-service on positive psychology. And he talked about that the research on optimism suggests that it is very powerful for people's well-being and it's a good thing. And he said, and I accept that, but what's interesting is it almost goes in the exact opposite direction of what we're kind of taught in mindfulness and acceptance, which is in acceptance, if you get attached to a certain outcome, like that, the future is going to be great or whatever, that you're setting yourself up for pain, for suffering. And that it seems like optimism is a setup to not be accepting. In other words, acceptance is really whatever happens, happens. I will accept it. I will deal with that, rather than like, hey, I'm really hopeful that something great's going to happen or whatever. How do you make sense of that? Because he posed that, and I was like, that is an interesting thought, because there's research on both those things that say acceptance helps mental health, and so does optimism.
I do agree with both things, if that makes sense, because it's true. If you are trying to be optimistic, you're hopeful about a goal, that hope is something that can compel you and push you forward. But then if you don't achieve that goal and you're attached to that goal and it doesn't happen, then it creates an issue. So the idea that optimism maybe isn't, it's a different construct, in my opinion. Like, it doesn't quite fit with the idea of, okay, we're happy, but I guess optimism in and of itself is future forward thinking, and it can be good for well-being. It just depends on the context of how we're using it. Like, are we being optimistic about this present moment? And I think that maybe is what, but it feels hard to say because optimism is truly about the future. So that was kind of a confusing ramble there, but I
accept
agree.
it.
I accept it.
And I'm optimistic that next time you'll hit it out of the park.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's go that way. Yep.
Any other thoughts about how to reconcile that?
Well, I mean, I think of optimism. It's something that's powerful because we have to train our brain to do that. In its default setting, our brain is probably more wired to look for threats and negativity and patterns. And it's really easy to have that warp into this sense of like negativity and cynicism and hopelessness and helplessness. I think acceptance is really, once something has happened, the ability to make peace with it and not get stuck. Whereas optimism is, even with negative things in the past, is be able to recognize that that doesn't foreshadow that things are going to continue to be bad, that we need to open our minds to look for the good and positive. And I know those are oversimplified aspects, because I'll be honest, I don't know how more optimistic I've become over my life, but I think I've become much more accepting, right? You know, making peace with the amount of control and influence I do and do not have. And I think I've become less neurotic in a negative sense.
Yeah. But again, I think these things are very different. Like, it's hard to equate the two. And just like when you even bringing it back to the original article, optimism is very different from life satisfaction or from happiness, or, you know,
But
so
they're linked to each other.
They are linked, but they're not the same. So
They're not the same idea.
Right. But I guess the field of the positive psychology field is all about fostering well-being. And so if you're trying to facilitate that, of course you're going to look at both of these things, but to say one is better than the other is hard to do.
Well, what I'm trying to get at is acceptance has to do with accepting things as they are. And by the way, I would say acceptance does also include whatever happens, not just what has already happened, but it's also like, well, whatever happens, I accept. And optimism is this general sense of positivity toward the future. And so what he was saying is, are these two things at odds with each other, even though they both lead to well-being? One thought I had is, I wonder if optimism isn't optimism about a particular outcome. I wonder if it's not an attachment to a particular goal or outcome. In other words, I'm optimistic that I will get a promotion, or I will get this certain thing will happen, but more like I feel generally positive about the future. I wonder if it's more that it's general rather than attached to a particular outcome.
I could see that, because I think it's more of an optimism for life, and it's that positive lens that we're viewing things through. So, you know, the world is abundant, you know, life is good. These kind of hopeful, happy feeling sort of aspects, but I think you might be on to that piece.
You know, Dave, you are the co-founder of Southeast Psych. I don't know how you're going to give yourself a promotion if that's what it takes to be optimistic about life, but whatever.
I know how I'm going to give myself a promotion.
A pay raise.
No pay raise. I'm promoting myself to the great beyond. We're going to move on. We're going to promote the podcast to our trending topic, which is the psychology of Keanu Reeves. And there's a lot to talk about here. And we're talking about him because his new film, John Wick, is out in a couple weeks. And we want to take a little deeper dive about the psychology of this star. And first, I want to throw this out to anybody. Do you have a favorite Keanu movie? Anything that you a movie that you just love of his?
I mean, I would imagine most people would say The Matrix, but I also really liked what he did in The Devil's Advocate. I thought that was a fascinating role to see him wrestle with the risks of working for the devil. I thought that he really did a great job in that movie.
I really like Constantine. It scared the crap out of me. And our engineer really liked Ted and
Bill and
Bill's
Ted's Excellent
Adventure.
Oh, yeah.
As he holds his sign up.
Jonathan, you have a favorite?
I actually really liked a lot of his early work. He was in River's Edge. He was in My Own Private Idaho with River Phoenix. And it's really kind of shocking what his career trajectory has been, because I would have not have predicted it with some of those earlier, more somber films that he did. But I think he is an underrated actor. I don't know if he's always had the best stories or characters to show his range.
I've liked the pure action stuff of his. I like Speed. I like the John Wick movies. I just think he's very well suited to those. He's got that sort of that persona that's like, I'm unflappable in this moment, and I think it just works perfectly for that. So which of you knows much about his early childhood, his growing up, his experiences that you'd like to share? Anybody want to talk about that? Go ahead, Frank.
Well, until I knew he was a resilient guy, and I knew he'd been through some pretty horrible things. But if you just read his early childhood, born in Beirut, mom's married a bajillion people, he lives all over the place. He's got citizenship in Canada, a green card in America. The number of places he lived throughout his childhood and the men that came in and out of his mom's life, I would never have predicted him to become this amazing, giving, almost seemingly egoless person. It's amazing.
Yeah, we'll get into that part in a second. Any other backstory that anybody wants to share?
Honestly, he's a very private person. That's what I realized. I was trying to do some research, and he very rarely talks about his personal life. And I think that's a really great approach, because when you're a celebrity and you put yourself out there, you have to be very careful about how much you're going to share, because if you do, they're going to take a mile of it. They're going to want to know everything.
In his 20s, he was really close with River Phoenix. I mean, some things claim that they were best friends at the time that River Phoenix died of the overdose, and that really had to have hit him hard. It talks about later, right at the turn of the 21st century, his partner was pregnant with their daughter, but the child was stillborn, and then that eventually resulted in their relationship falling apart. And then 18 months later, his ex-girlfriend was killed in a car accident. And so you just sort of see, really in a short amount of time, in a very young life, all of these traumas and loss that happen in all these different areas. So it's not just family dysfunction. It's not just unresolved issues with a parent or something. It's just like, man, grief and loss and trauma hit him in almost like every conceivable way at a young age.
Yep. So Frank's already alluded to this, and we're going to try and connect the dots with all this in a bit. But Frank's already alluded to the fact that given all that, given this early history of multiple moves and rootlessness and men in and out of his mom's life, and then some of the traumatic losses that he experienced, and there's at least, like you said, 3 major traumatic losses that he's experienced. He has ended up becoming a very, very altruistic and good guy that is considered one of the good guys in Hollywood, one of the best people. I mean, just on a human level. So anybody have information to fill that in about like what kind of stuff he's done? We'll talk about why and how that all fits together, but just some of the things that he's involved himself in.
Well, so one of the things that I keep seeing is that he truly does, we were talking about acceptance, and one of the themes kind of associated with that is being in the present. And I found all of this stuff with him over social media where he, rides the subway, and found this great little video of him taking a bus back when there was an issue with the flight, and just sitting and having a sandwich. And that's where that sad Keanu meme came from. But because he actually, I want to share a quote. So none of us are getting out of here alive, so please stop treating yourself like an afterthought. Eat the delicious food, walk in the sunshine, jump in the ocean, say the truth that you're carrying in your heart like hidden treasure. Be silly, be kind, be weird. There's no time for anything else. So you can just tell that like he lives his life in the present. And when you do that, you kind of get rid of some of the attachments to things that just don't matter. So you do what makes your heart sing.
Other insights or thoughts about what he's done that make people regard him as such a good guy?
Well, I think he's a great example of it really isn't that challenging to be a decent person. Like maybe for some people it takes a lot of effort, but I truly believe that for most people it's just a choice that you make. You make that decision to be a decent, honorable person, and then you use your life experiences to make the world a better place. I think what is especially refreshing about him in this age is that he doesn't play it for publicity. He's not trying to craft this public image that he is this saint, or that he is that he wants attention by all of that affirmation and validation. If anything, it really feels like he's trying to do it quietly without the attention, which to me is probably one of the most refreshing aspects of his generosity of spirit, is that he doesn't have an Instagram account where he's constantly posting photos of him being this great guy. You just hear from other people and sources about what a decent human being he is.
It's like he's wired. You meet these intellectual people that are settled with who they are. They kind of know their place in the world. It's almost like a Renaissance person that's not needing anything. That he's just taking life as it is, and it's a rare thing. I love meeting those people. They're super rare, and I don't know how he does it in Hollywood, but I'll tell you. I don't know if you've done this, but there's also this theory that he's immortal. So if we take that theory,
Constantine,
then okay, it's of course he would behave this way because he's been alive since 1847. The guy his name's Paul Monet, Mounet, and so I'd like to start believing that he's actually immortal.
Yeah,
because he did say he could live essentially for centuries on the money he's made. That's a Keanu Reeves quote. I could live for centuries. So maybe he's been alive for 160 years.
Context clues for quotes are very important, as we have learned in our social media days recently. And for the record, that was coming from one of his acts of generosity. He donated, it was like $18 million of his money from The Matrix to all of the makeup staff.
That's
and the
actually not
staff.
true.
It's not?
It's not true.
Okay, well.
He actually cleared room in the budget to increase special effects budget. But he did buy each of the stuntmen on the movie a Harley. But that actually is a myth.
And it is not true that Keanu Reeves has given me $10 million. But this is your chance, Keanu. This is your chance to make things right. Jonathan Hedderly, $10 million. I will go to the press, or I'll keep it to myself, whatever you want. But this is your opportunity to show how great of a guy you really are. Keanu, I'm here.
Well, you guys have hit on a lot of this, that he is a guy who almost every film set he works on, he's beloved because of the way he treats people on the set, but also he's been known to give money secretly to crew members who are in need. He has cut some of his own salary to give more room for for other things that the people on the set need. He's very generous with what he has. He's given people gifts, but then in his real life, it's a lot of the stuff that Jonathan's talking about. He's not doing any of it for publicity, but people find out later that he sat with a homeless guy that he saw, that he gives up his seat when he's in public transportation, that he drove a woman 50 miles out of the way because she needed a ride, that when he was on a plane that was diverted, he's the guy that coordinated for some of them a ride for them to get where they needed to go. That kind of thing over and over and over again. So the big question, he just without question, genuinely just a good guy. How do you make sense, and we're going to speculate a little bit here, how do you make sense of a guy who's had that kind of rootless background, who's had multiple traumatic events and losses? I mean, it would be easy for that guy just to pull into himself, to not be giving toward other people, to not be attached to other people in the healthy sense. How do you make sense of that?
I mean, I feel like he's been through a lot, and typically when you go through a lot, you either grow or you don't. And I think he is somebody that really did take the time and energy to grow. And I would imagine, too, all of his training for his films, it's given him a lot of exposure to a lot of the Eastern philosophies, with whether it's Buddhism or, doing the Tai Chi or all the martial arts stuff for the films. You get exposure to different ways of thinking about things. And a lot of it, does focus on that acceptance piece and moving past, understanding that there's suffering. So I would assume that he just has figured out how to work through that.
I also think he's obviously he's very intelligent, but I think he is a very, very willful person, that when he puts his mind to something, he does it, whether it's playing hockey, being a goalie, because he said when he was in high school, he was kind of a butthole. Like he was not somebody that adults cared much for. But I think when you couple, it's that post-traumatic growth thing that we've talked about, where you go through a trauma and it's either going to knock you down, return you to the same, or it's going to take you up a notch. And I think each of his traumas, the way he's wired, has taken him up a notch. And I also think being rootless it forced him to be flexible, to accept change, to figure out how to roll with that. I think those are probably some of the variables.
And I suspect with the post-traumatic growth, we know one of the things that is often born out of that is a greater sense of spirituality and purpose. I suspect he is actually a very deeply spiritual person. He's just not going to really be outspoken about it, like a lot of things. He doesn't want to be a poster child of anything. He just wants to live a life of dignity and of great meaning. And he's trying to, I think he's just trying to put more positivity and goodwill back into a world that he in a firsthand way, knows how much things can be robbed and taken from you.
He's a fascinating guy, and we're looking forward to seeing this movie. Any last thoughts about Keanu, of things that you've either discovered or just insights that you have about the man?
You guys need to all Google or YouTube the video of him for his firearms training. The tactical expertise of this guy is insane. He is incredible with guns now.
And I would like to publicly call out one of the clinicians at Southeast Psych. Her name is Angie Mayo, who says that the John Wick movies are completely stupid.
Oh.
Why would you kill essentially 100 people over a puppy? That's how she sums it up, and it makes me crazy.
Good old Angie Mayo.
Oh, wow.
Well, we'd love to hear what you think about Keanu, and also about whether you think it's justified for him to kill 100 people for a puppy, or what you think about the John Wick movies. You can tweet us at shrink_tank, or write us at feedback@shrinktank.com. Our final segment, something that we call Doctor's Orders. And these are things that we're personally enjoying in pop culture. Emma Kate, what do you have?
So I commute, and I really love finding new podcasts. And I listened to a 10-episode podcast based on Eckhart Tolle. I can't say his name. Tolle, 2005 book, or maybe it's 2008. Anyway, A New Earth, Awakening Your Life's Purpose. And it's with Oprah. And it goes through, there's 10 episodes, and it's different chapters, different aspects of that book. And it's really, really powerful stuff. So I think people should check it out if you want to learn how to quiet your mind and live a more fully present life.
Frank.
I would like to recommend a TV show you can see on Netflix called I'm Sorry. And it is very, very funny. I didn't know it existed, but it's basically a woman, I believe she's a comedy writer, and it's just sort of all these events that she goes through. But I laugh out loud at this TV show.
I'm going to recommend a book called Don't Label Me. It's by a woman named Irshad Manji, and she is Muslim, and she's a lesbian, and she's also pushing back on this culture of real politically correct speech. She's going in the exact opposite direction that you might expect, and that's kind of her point, is that we're living in a culture that labels people quickly, that has thought policing, and she's really giving some antidotes to that. The book is framed around a conversation that she's having with her dog, which I think you can, she's trying to make it a gentle conversation, but it is definitely a good book to be reading during these times. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. If you like the episode, you can give us a good rating on iTunes and also tell your friends about us and help them subscribe as well. It really helps our podcast grow, and we really appreciate it. And for more content exploring the intersection of psychology and pop culture, you can visit shrinktank.com. We have great articles and videos, and you can also find links to our Doctor's Orders products, and you can check them out yourself. You can follow us on Twitter at @shrink_tank and like us on Facebook. For our loyal listeners, make sure you check out the video version of this podcast on our YouTube channel by searching Shrink Tank, and you'll see all of our beaming faces. If you're watching the YouTube channel, we'd love for you to subscribe. You can subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you listen. And for questions or comments, drop us a note. Our email is feedback@shrinktank.com. Our producer and theme music composer is Sean Beck. Our associate producer and social media guru is Mariel Butler. For Emma Kate Wright and Jonathan Hedderly and Frank Gaskell in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. Tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.
Shrink Tank.